All right, here we go. There we are then. Thanks for the spam, Mako. You kind of seem more artificial than intelligent.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more
Hey,
torrid
everybody.
band who purveys its
Hey,
rhythms
Wisp.
all danceable,
And
the
hey,
Congress
Miles.
Hotel in
Look
Chicago.
who is here.
And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
That's our Miles. Hey, Kathleen, Luann, Timothy. Let's get my stuff set up here. I was adding new stuff to this right up to the last second. Hey, Heather. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Marie. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Lisa. Debating whether to go ahead with the weekend tours. Looks like rain and snow, even. That's maybe why nobody's buying tickets. And why those who have are saying, hey, is there going to be another one? I should probably just let this one go, right? Then again, traditionally I've used this weekend to have some spending money for the trip that I take the next week. I tend to take a trip in November. Or thereabouts. Hey, Kathleen in the euphonium section. The copper-belled euphoniums, horns of every shape and kind. Hey, Megan. Hey, Rose. I need a drink too, you know. What should I have? What should I have? I haven't had dinner yet. I should probably take it easy. I will just have some scotch this week. The Trader Joe's Islay Storm, which is pretty peaty. Hey, everybody. I mean, even if I just have like 10 people between the two, that's still like, you know, enough to buy the bathroom vanity that I need. Doing a whole Chicago theme in my bathroom. I've always had kind of a Chicago CTA theme, and now I'm kind of expanding on that as I finally fix it up with proper fixtures. Hey, Tony, good to run into you today. Oh, you know what I gotta do? No, better not. Better not update the upcoming tours if I don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah, Megan, that's cool. You gotta go to Transit Tees on Clark. So a lot of their same stuff is at the Chicago History Museum gift shop. Well, they got a lot of good Chicago accessories. Luke is doing zombie prom. A lot of schools do zombie prom. Schools and junior theaters and stuff. It's been quite a while now since we did the Chicago Theater History one as a benefit for that theater. But you guys really came through on that. Let's see Ember is having a blast down here. What are you pouncing on, Ember? What do you got down there? She's behind the ottoman right now. There she goes. What she's got. Ember, what is that? No, that's a screw. You probably shouldn't be playing with a screw. Let's find you a nice mouse, okay? Don't you have a nice mouse around here someplace that you can play with? Something else you can chase? Over there, Ember. Just chasing nothing. Let's go get you one of those nice rabbit fur mice that Jenna got you. How about that? If you have one over in there under that couch. Hey, Todd. And another Todd. Hey, everybody. You can probably get Malort scented soap, you know. Hey, Leah. Glad to have you. Always glad. Alright, Ember, why don't you get you one of these mice out? Come on. Whoa.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
There you go, Red Mouse. Evening, Grandma Bell. Ooh, making a Malort bottle into a soap dispenser. That's cool. Very clever. Hey, everybody. Hey, Elaine. Hey, everybody. If my folks aren't here, they're gonna miss, like this picture. Rally the other day. Evening, Marita. Yep, Miles is right here, looking down at Ember as she plays with this mouse. Presently, she's behind the ottoman. Ember, did you lose it behind the couch already? You can get under there. Oh, yep, it's in her mouth. Evening, Lori. Hey, Chris.
And they all loved it. They all loved those passages when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Evening, Bob. Evening, Paula. Hey, everybody. Sorry about the weather upcoming this weekend. Chance of snow on Sunday, so we might have to just cancel these supersized tours or try them again when I get back. Particularly this Sunday. Hey, Dad. Hey, Janice, Carol. Hey, Amy. Always good to provide a nice, good place to be at the end of the day, at the end of a tough day. We aim to do that. Cheers, Laura. Hey, Gladys. Pat, I don't know. We'll see. It's supposed to rain one day and snow the next. I don't need to be getting everybody sick. Least of all myself right before I go out of town. Hey, Mom, hey, Kitty. Hey, Ted, over on YouTube. First time joining the Seltzer Tour, though I've been too many times. Well, all right, glad to have you. Particularly important week for it. Laura, you know, we can't just say no snow and have it not happen. It's not like with Swiper or something. Ember is just going nuts chasing this mouse. One of the rabbit fur mice that Jenna got her. I've been doling them out in like piecemeal as she wrecks one of them. So she's always got a new one. Watch, she's about to see her carrying it. And there she goes. All right, Benny is wrapping it up. That means it is time for us to get started properly here. All right, hello everybody. I might have just missed right there. Welcome along. That did not pause. All right, so here we are. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 20 years now. Got a number of books out, such as Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Smart Aleck's Guide to American History, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry. A couple of these I'm actually going to be eating more off of that piracy and AI settlement than I actually got from selling them. So that's where we go. And a lot of the it would be worthwhile for today to also plug Christopher Robert Reed's book, Black Chicago's First Century. Now, for some of this stuff, I actually ended up going into his papers at Roosevelt University. So I just have to say, Professor Reed, your handwriting is even worse than mine, and that's really saying something too. But fascinating work, excellent. This is absolutely essential for this sort of research. So what we're talking about today is kind of the closest analog I can find to what's coming on now. Now, it's not the same thing. People, those of us standing on corners with whistles, are not exactly hiding people in our cellars, at least not yet. But the closest analog I can come when talking about Greg Bovino and his band of stormtroopers and the way that the Chicago has stood up to them is comparing them to the slave catchers who were coming to town in the 1840s and 1850s and the way Chicagoans got together and stood up to them. Now, this sort of thing is very difficult to research. If they were doing their job, a lot of times the story didn't survive. Like, there's this fantastic story that came up in one newspaper. A woman wrote in saying, I got to tell you the story about Chicago. This guy escaped from slavery up to here. Then once he got back, he wrote back to where he came from and say, hey, I'm sorry. I made a really big mistake running away like that. If you take me back and promise not to punish me, I'll use what I've learned and teach all of the other people on the plantation all the dangers of escaping and why they should just stay put. So, they agreed to take him back, and as soon as he got a chance to tell everybody to stay put, he's like, okay, here's how you escape. This is how the story goes, but it's very difficult to verify. This is from an 1848 newspaper. Without last names or anything, there's really no way to figure out whether it was true or not. Most of what we have is just really sketchy information, though there are occasions where things that happened in Chicago made newspapers all over the place. So, all right, let's move along. We're just going to get started here. We're going to start with some of the people who worked on Underground Railroad work or stopping slave catchers in Chicago. When we talk about the Underground Railroad, we tend to think that there were like stops on it. It's very common to hear that every building that they find a secret compartment in, say, this building must have been a stop on the Underground Railroad. That kind of implies that it was more organized than it usually was. A lot of it was just people making things up as they went along, trying to find safe places as they went. Sometimes it wasn't very easy. There were particular cases where it said we had this person come to us for help, and we didn't know where any of the stops on this Underground Railroad were. They just had to work along. But this is one that comes up on a lot of the walking tours. This is Philo Carpenter at Graceland Cemetery. There's a statue of him, a bust that is now missing. I couldn't figure out where this is today, but it was by Laredo Taft, the same guy who did the Eternal Silence statue right nearby. Now, Philo Carpenter came to Chicago as a pharmacist, but later was one of the founders of the Anti-Slavery Society in the city, and is said to have even had a farm up in the North Woods where people could hide out until they could get out of Chicago. Now, a lot of people who came to Chicago escaping from slavery just stayed in Chicago, but those who wanted to play it safer and move on to Canada, there were a couple of particular ships that were known for being very accommodating for that on the Great Lakes. One of them was the Great Western. Philo Carpenter would help people hide out until the Great Western came to town. The captain was only too happy not to notice that he suddenly had a lot more black crew members. Captain Wheeler did this at great personal risk. At one point, he was captured in prison and branded with an SS for slave stealer on his hand. Branded. One of the people who worked with him, and is mentioned in the same story as him a couple of times, was a guy who had a house right over here at about Plymouth, right kind of near Dearborn Station. There's a guy by the name of Joseph Henry Hudlin. This is usually said to have been the first frame house built by a black man in Chicago. Unfortunately, I've never found a picture, or a better one than this, about whether that we can really say was him. But we do know there's a fascinating story of him over here at Graceland Cemetery. We'll move this picture of him back up. Here's a gravestone that just says Papa, right next to a guy named Willis Montgomery. Now, Joseph Hudlin was born enslaved himself in Culpeper, Virginia. There are a lot of different accounts as to exactly how he escaped. The simplest version of it is that one day he just got onto a ship that was going to be going up to Illinois wearing a chef's hat and just pretended he was a chef until they got to Illinois. Then when they got to Illinois, he just left. Made his way to Chicago, got a job as the janitor on the Board of Trade, became an expert on commodities trading, but also enough of an expert to know not to get involved himself. Instead, he was selling all of the grain samples that people brought in and left behind. As the janitor, he had access to them, made a fortune for himself just selling those. Probably more than most of the guys who worked on the Board of Trade did. He was also known for helping to put down a would-be assassin when Philip Armour was nearly shot to death there. I think it was Philip Armour. Known for saving a lot of documents at the time of the Great Chicago Fire. Now, here is the weird thing, though. He got to Chicago, started working on the Underground Railroad. He had a brother back in Alton, Illinois. People who made it across from St. Louis to Alton would meet up with him at a train station. He'd accompany them up to Chicago, and then he'd either help them get settled or help them wait around until the Great Western showed up. But here's the thing. He's got this gravestone at Graceland, but his actual plot is over here, which has this blank stone. The lot record for it says Base for Monument. Now, he is buried there. A couple of family members are buried there, but others are buried elsewhere. And the family apparently never got around to actually putting up the monument. The monument is in the next plot over. But this is Mary Ann Stevens, a plot along with her daughter, Martha Stevens Gray. And I remember right next to Henry is Willis Montgomery. Now, here's the thing. Martha and Mary escaped from slavery in St. Louis. Willis Montgomery, they have a typo on here. 1859 is the year that he came to Chicago, not the year that he was born. He'd come up from Kentucky. Now, exactly why they put a monument to Joseph here is not really known. We know they were members of the same church. We know that Mary was initially buried over in the Hudlin family plot. Hers apparently hadn't been purchased yet. But after this plot adjacent was purchased, they had her body moved over to the next plot. And eventually they put up a monument to Joseph in their plot instead of in his own. Exactly why this would be, we can't really know for sure, but the most obvious thing that jumps out is that Mary and Martha and Willis might have been people that he helped escape. And putting up this monument was was kind of a tribute to him. We're gonna cover from about 1842 to 1862 in these stories here. Now, over in 1842, this was a place called Chapman's Building across the street from one of the jails. So, a man by the name of Edwin Heathcock was arrested on suspicion of being what they would have then called a fugitive slave. The fugitive slave law was not in effect, but someone who was working alongside him got it in his head that he was escaping, not actually supposed to be free. He didn't have any papers to prove that he was free, so he was put in jail for a while, just so anybody who might have been enslaving him could come to claim him. Now, there was a thing in the laws at the time saying that in Chicago, if you were put in jail and couldn't pay for your food while you were there, when they let you out, they could auction you into up to a month of indentured servitude. This wasn't quite the same as being auctioned into perpetual slavery, but it looked close enough that it was really freaking people out. So flyers were posted all over warning about this sale that was going to be happening in Chicago. Now, there are a couple of breathless accounts of this. Everybody showed up with stern looks on their face. The sheriff was trying to get an auction going, but nobody was daring to make a bid, and a lot of people were standing around to make sure nobody made a bid. Now, eventually, the sheriff said, if I don't get any bids, I have to put the man back in jail. And out the window of Chapman's Building looked Mahlon Ogden, the brother of William Butler Ogden, our first mayor. Mahlon looked out and said, I bid 2 bits. And the sheriff, in one of the dramatic accounts, issued that immortal call, going, gone. So Ogden walked down and paid his quarter, went up to Edwin Heathcock and said, okay, you are my man, I bought you, I say go where you like. So, but this probably averted a riot for 25 cents. Edwin Heathcock, it's difficult to know exactly what became of him, but there was a man by that name who ended up fighting in the Union Army 20 years later. And the dates roughly matched up enough that I was pretty sure it was him. Just difficult to know for sure, but Mahlon Ogden has now got a space all to himself up here. Now, there are 2 first-hand accounts of this that were written. One treated Mahlon like he was an absolute villain just for dignifying the whole thing with a response, and the other treated him like he was a hero for having averted a riot for 25 cents. Both of these accounts, though, were written by the same guy, Zabina Eastman, who is over here at Rose Hill Cemetery. Now, a majority of these abolitionist guys are at Graceland or at Oak Woods. Not as many at Rose Hill, but some. Political lines in cemeteries are not that carefully drawn. But Zabina Eastman wrote both of the accounts. Apparently, at first he thought that Ogden was being a real villain, but on later reflection decided he was kind of a hero. But he was the publisher of a newspaper first called the Western Citizen and then the Free West. This was an abolitionist paper. One of my favorite finds as a researcher was finding this Frederick Douglass speech in the Western Citizen that I found had not been transcribed anywhere else. It was absent from all the books of Douglass's speeches. It wasn't online anywhere, except for a couple of quotes that got reprinted in a Chicago history book, and we can almost see from those quotes why it didn't get printed at the time. It was a speech he gave at Princeton, Illinois in 1853, and he said that when a slave is first running away, he would rather meet a wolf than a Christian. Better a rattlesnake than a man with a prayer book under his arms. And this sentiment may have been absolutely true, but also it drove abolitionists crazy because it was just not good PR. They wanted the Christians to be on their side, and this just kind of pushed them away. I can understand where both sides were coming from on this, but that was one of my favorite research finds. So, we're moving up. That was 1842. 1845, there was another case. The guy who was at Oak Woods Cemetery named Dr. Charles Volney Dyer, who was originally he came to Chicago as a doctor. He and Levy Boone, later a mayor under the Know Nothing Party, did the first dissection in Chicago of the murderer John Stone in 1840. But later he came to be known as the president of the Underground Railroad. Now in 1845, there was this case where he was sitting in his office over about where City Hall is now. And he had been helping a couple of people escape, but somebody came running into his office, a clerk, and said, "Mr. Dyer, Dr. Dyer, that man you've been helping to escape, there are slave catchers in town and they've captured him. They've taken him to the Mansion House Hotel." So Dyer jumped up from his breakfast, grabbed his cane, and ran all the way to the Mansion House Hotel. We'll cover up where that was. It was only a couple of blocks away. Let's hit a little bit more in slow motion here. It would have been right across the street from where the Tremont House would eventually be. Right by what is now known as the Alley of Death and Mutilation on Ghost Tours and the Goodman Theater on the left. But he busted into this place, Charles Volney Dyer did, and there they found the guy he'd been helping to escape tied up by a couple of slave catchers. And as he busted into the room, these men said, "Sir, you are interfering with our domestic institutions." I'm gonna do that accent for us. "Sir, I say, sir, you are interfering with our domestic institutions." To which Dyer replied, "Oh yes, well you are interfering with my breakfast," and busted his cane over their heads and helped the guy escape again. Now, this made a lot of news at the time. It's such like an Indiana Jones action hero line that I hesitate to believe that it really happened like that. But this was a widely repeated story at the time. In fact, groups of abolitionist citizens got together at the time and bought him a new cane. Now, that new cane is still held by the Chicago Historical Society. It was donated to them. They've confirmed to me that they still have it. It's not on display. It's just in their collections. I'd really like to see him get that out one of these days. I should write to him again. I got some contacts there. But Charles Volney Dyer, I love this guy. But nearby his office was the office of another of our abolitionist lawyers. This is a guy, L.C.P. Freer. We'll move over to his grave. But he was not only a lawyer, he and his wife Esther, were also working on the Underground Railroad. He outlived most of the other abolitionists, living well into the late 19th century, so he had a lot more stories to tell than others. And at one point he was asked, did the abolitionists of Chicago believe in compromise? He said, "No, we believed in war." Now, he wasn't quite as violent with this thing as some of the other people, such as his partner, but people remembered him having people who were escaping, hiding, getting into new clothes in his kitchen. But right across from him at Graceland is a gravestone for his partner, James H. Collins. We'll move right up to this one. Now, I really wish that I could find, one of my ongoing quests is finding a good drawing of James H. Collins. He lived to 1854. There's probably, most people who lived that long and were as prominent as he was had photographs taken. I would think there would at least be a sketch. So far, I have not come across one. But he was the law partner of L.C.P. Freer and known as a particularly violent abolitionist. Now, there was a point in 1846, 3 people from Missouri who were trying to escape were arrested in Chicago and taken to a jail. And as they were taken to a jail, Collins, Freer, and a couple of others, I think Dr. Dyer was there with them. I know John Jones was there with him. We'll get to him a little bit later. Went into a Judge Kercheval's office, which was right about here, and just really kind of created a distraction. They told him that we can't really know that these people are even fugitives. The deputy here does not have the authority to arrest people like that. As far as we're concerned, as soon as they get into Illinois, they count as free. There's a great line around the Rhine, like, how do we even know these people were fugitives? Just because this guy says they were? What court would take the testimony of a horse thief as to the ownership of the horse that has been stolen? So, While they were arguing, though, the real thing was that a mob was forming outside, or a crowd, or a mob, depending on which paper you were reading. The door of the jail was busted down. Later accounts, it was a Jewish man by the name of Michael Greenbaum who busted it down, good friend of Rabbi Emil Hirsch. They busted down the door and helped these guys escape, and by the time Judge Kercheval ruled that yes, I have to let them go, they were already long gone. Now, one really interesting thing is this made national news. So it's really interesting to look at how this story was treated all over the place. It was the kind of story that was happening all over the country. In Chicago, it was just a bigger thing. This is the Chicago Journal said, "Disorder triumphant." Forcibly taken from the court of justice by a mob and hurried right out of his jurisdiction. This may be all right, but where this spirit is permitted to prevail unchecked, we may as well ask what security there is for persons of the property in the community. And this is the sentiment of a lot of papers, like, well, we can see where they were coming from, but we've got laws around here, you know. The Gem of the Prairie said, while we regret the violation of the law, there are cases, and we think this is one, where there is more merit in disregarding than in keeping it. And how an American citizen who glorifies and venerates the names of our revolutionary ancestors because of their rebellion against tyrannical laws can condemn this act, we cannot comprehend. There's also a paper called the Chicago Cavalier that said, there are some cases where this sort of thing would be warrantable, but really it's probably better that we just try to fight the laws instead of helping people get free. So the aggressively middle-of-the-road stance you see in a lot. The Daily Cavalier was interesting to see. I've never seen a Daily Cavalier. This is the first time I'd ever seen a reference to the Chicago Daily Cavalier. So I had to look this one up a little bit more. And did find out the Western Citizen, Zabina Eastman's paper, mentioned when it was being published about the only things about the Cavalier. The only people who ever seemed to care what the Cavalier said were the Western Citizen, who said, but that's nice, but couldn't a less belligerent name have been selected? Cavaliers, however chivalrous, have hitherto done little but hack and slash their fellow men, and have never, to our knowledge, raised a bushel of wheat or potatoes to keep them alive. To our notion, they have always been a shabby set of fellows, roaming about to pick quarrels with honest people instead of staying at home and minding their own business. Well, this really sounds like they were advocating staying at home and minding their own business in this case. This got as far as New York, where the New York Tribune said the men were walking about and viewing the town when about 11 o'clock a.m., 3 of them were suddenly seized by a man calling himself Gallagher, assisted by Deputy Sheriff Rhines. Gallagher professed to be the agent of a Mr. Wash of St. Louis, who he said was the owner of the Negroes arrested. Rhines is a degraded, drunken wretch, ready and accustomed to assist in the most nefarious schemes for money or office, whom the Locos Focos sheriff of this capital city has made his deputy. Loco Foco was a name for the more conservative Democrats at the time. Now, after these guys were released, James Collins had a particularly violent, one of his trademark violent quotes, saying that if you ever see a police officer arresting a fugitive slave in Chicago, you're within your rights to shoot that police officer, because they don't have the authority to make that arrest. All they're doing is kidnapping. I want to talk a little bit about Henry Rhines. The great influential wretch, sheriff. So this here on LaSalle Street would be about where Henry Rhines lived. Henry Rhines was the arresting officer of John Stone, the murderer that Charles Volney Dyer dissected, the first arrested murderer in Chicago. He is also, interestingly, at Graceland Cemetery, along with all of his rivals. Now, he was a police officer for a number of years in Chicago, over a decade, and seems to have spent a good portion of his time just trying to arrest people that he thought might be fugitives. Sometimes he would leave Chicago and go up to Milwaukee to arrest people that he thought might be fugitives. Now, we don't really know, I don't really know what this guy looked like. We know his son looked like this. I'm just going to assume maybe he looked like this. That's going to be my guess. The courthouse today where this guy was right about where Rhines used to live. And I would run out of dance moves by the time I got to his grave, but I did do the hand jive. But at one point, Rhines shot a bartender and was put in jail for it. Then the bartender died and it became a manslaughter case, if not a murder case. But he escaped from jail, got down to New Orleans, and then was captured again, brought back to Chicago again, but then pardoned by the governor. I can't really figure out how that worked. He would be back at work and back at his old tricks in the next couple of years. There is a very interesting story about him, though, with the Great Western. We already mentioned the Great Western that would go along Lake Michigan, as seen here. There was a time when a few people were being put on board that ship, and Henry Rhines came out to yell at Captain Walker. And I can never remember if it was Walker or Wheeler. It's like different in different accounts. But he came up to him and said, "Do you know that you have people escaping on that boat?" And the captain said, "Do you have any authority to stop me?" And Rhines admitted that he did not, so the captain said, "Then you're just a damned rascal," and sailed off, while people like Philo Carpenter stood on the shore celebrating. Now, damned rascal, that was fighting words. There's a lot of duels started with somebody using the phrase damned rascal. But among the people partying on the shore that day was a guy by the name of Louis Isbell, who would later claim to be the first black man in Chicago. He might not have known about Jean-Baptiste Point-du-Sable, but he was a barber who operated right over here where the Google building is now, the Thompson Center, then the site of the Sherman House Hotel. Now, Louis Isbell had a lot of stories later in life, many of which might have just been old man stories, especially all the stories about his connection to Abraham Lincoln, but he certainly would have known Lincoln and cut Lincoln's hair. Lincoln, at the beginning of the Lincoln movie, Lincoln said his last barber hanged himself and left him the scissors. That was not something Louis Isbell did. Louis Isbell later claimed that Lincoln had asked him to recruit black soldiers during the Civil War, and certainly went to work doing so. Something like 250 of them or something were encouraged to join by Louis Isbell. Later he would ask for a military pension, but recruiter was not technically a job open to black men at the time, so the military denied his pension decades later. I still think it is not too late. He's got an unmarked grave down at Mount Olivet Cemetery. I think we should consider him a veteran and add a gravestone for him. I've written to a couple of my senators about this. It's, kind of low priority, but easy, good publicity. Working on that one. As I said, it's hard to tell how many of his stories might be real and how many might just be old man stories, though his story about recruiting was certainly well documented at the time. But over here at the Old City Cemetery, we've got David Kennison, who claimed to be the last survivor of the Boston Tea Party and was certainly lying about it. But he used his powers for good. In 1848, he was going to free soil meetings, insisting that he was an abolitionist and saying when he fought for the freedom of the country, he didn't just mean the white men, and would scream out, "Make your country free and abolish slavery." Con artist, but he used his powers for good. So, earlier on, Collins had been saying that the Chicago police do not have the authority to make these kind of arrests. That would change in 1850 when the Fugitive Slave Law went into effect. So, here on State Street was the city hall that stood there at the time. Now, when the Fugitive Slave Law passed, that meant that everybody, not just the police, but everybody was obligated, if they came across, they were obligated to help return people back to slavery. So this was the Chicago City Council, but a whole thing saying that no, Chicago police will not be required to aid in the passage of this. The Common Council resolved that they will not require the city police to render any assistance to the arrest of fugitive slaves. James H. Collins stood up and exclaimed, "All temporal honor and glory to the Common Council of the city of Chicago. Political death and damnation to the bad, base men who aided in the passage of this infernal law, or who cowardly sneaked away from the vote at its final passage." So, immediately after that, there was a group of what was called the colored citizens at the time, who said, "Resolve the passage of this infamous fugitive slave law as another glaring instance of northern subserviency to the slaveholding dictation, being nothing less than establishing a hunting ground for slaveholders and kidnappers on free soil." And it gets a little bit worse than this, actually. Move something up over here. The day after they made that resolution saying we're not going to require anybody to help, Stephen Douglas, the senator, came to town. This is 8 years before the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but he was already a man of great esteem and power, and he made this massive speech. It went on for about 3 hours, convincing everybody that no, even if you don't like this law, we have to follow the law. You know, down south, they think the whole thing is just a big abolitionist scam. They think it's all just set up for you. And after this, the city council took all of their resolutions back. But then E.C. Larned, a lawyer, got up and made a speech of his own the next day, and even if they had removed it, they seemed to have at least gone along with it. Chicago police were very unhelpful for this over the years. In fact, it is generally said that over a course of between about 1853 and 1861, there were no arrests of fugitive slaves in Chicago, at least nobody who ended up being sent back. But this left a lot of things in question, like the Chicago Democrat said, does this mean, so there's a lot of questions here. Can slave hunters capture the children of people who have escaped from slavery? Their eventual conclusion was no, probably not. But this was something that really just, people were just kind of fed up with the whole thing by 1850. The Chicago Shawnee Post said the abolitionists call for repeal or modification of the fugitive slave law, but what would they have to talk about? And the Chicago Democrat itself published the entire speech, then said, our readers must bear with us if we drop the whole slavery subject for a while. There are a great many other matters to which we wish to treat our readers. But this changed the landscape of things in Chicago. They had to be a lot more proactive against stopping people. Groups were formed like the Vigilance Committee, the Liberty Guard. Now, among those was a guy by the name of George Manier, who lived with his wife Anne in a place right on Michigan Avenue. He was a lawyer at this point. And in 1851, there was a guy by the name of Moses Johnson who was arrested. He was arrested as a possible fugitive slave, but Manier arranged for him to have an actual trial. Now, the trial was held in the old saloon building. Here's Manier himself. Now, over the course of the trial, he found kind of a loophole. He was able to come up with a thing saying, okay, we have a warrant here saying Moses Johnson, a copper-colored man, has escaped. Now, Moses Johnson here has been arrested. He sits here before you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the warrant says copper-colored man. Is this a copper-colored man? This led to a whole day of debate as to exactly how Moses Johnson would be described. It was in many ways problematic and dehumanizing in and of itself, but it worked. The jury ruled that no, this man does not match the person on the warrant, therefore he must be free to go. Now, there's an interesting anecdote about something that went on during the trial. Overnight, they had Moses Johnson locked up in a block right around here about on Lake Street, and they hired a deputy to guard him. It was almost certainly Henry Rhines, who was definitely back and involved on this case. It was a couple of years before he would pass away, and he was given the task of guarding the door, but got drunk and guarded the door next door instead, which was a residential place. When the guy who lived next door came and found his door guarded, he said, "Hey, I'm getting into my place, please." And the guard said, "Not unless you say the password. If you say the password, I'll let you in. Otherwise, I'm gonna shoot you." And the guy said, "No, this is my house. I don't need a password." And the guy said, "Nope, nobody gets in without the password." So the guy said, "Fine, what's the password?" And the drunken guard said, "Fillmore. The password is Fillmore. Now say Fillmore or I'm going to shoot you." So the guy said Fillmore and was allowed to go in. Now, this is, again, it's such a Bugs Bunny kind of trick. It's hard to know whether we can take this as true, but it was reported almost immediately afterwards, not just like decades later. Manier himself is now at Graceland Cemetery. Moses Johnson was free to go. Manier eventually continued with this kind of work, but then when he became a judge, he had to step back from it, at least doing it too much as publicly. Stephen Douglas came back into the story. In 1854, he introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri capitulation that made slavery a southern thing and freedom a northern thing, by saying that any new territories, like these new territories of Kansas and Nebraska, will just have a vote on whether or not they are slave states, regardless of where they are in terms of geography. This led to armies being formed to make sure that Kansas became a slave state by any means necessary. It was not a popular law in Chicago. Stephen Douglas came to town to defend it in 1854 and ended up being kind of a riot. The audience became too noisy and threw rotten eggs, chips, and other things at the little giant. Alderman Keith was the only one who was struck. The gas was turned off and nearly everybody got another man's hat. This is a riot we can be proud of. Towards the end, Douglas pretended he had a letter saying that he would be threatened personally with violence if he ever spoke here. Talked about various cases here, but then afterwards he got really nasty in the speech, particularly being more racist even by the standards of the day, then went to have Louis Black cut his hair. And kind of, according to Louis Isbell, according to Isbell, Douglas kind of walked into the barber shop with his tail between his legs and said, "Well, I guess you're probably pretty mad at me." And Louis Isbell said, "Yes, you have said some nasty things about people of my race." But they had a little chat, and Douglas apologized at least to Isbell and got himself a haircut. But Douglas possibly hadn't predicted just how far people would go to make sure these new territories would vote to become slave states. This is a neighborhood called the Sands, a neighborhood that was mostly known for being full of whiskey bars and brothels, back before it was the Magnificent Mile area. But there was a particular case in 1856 during the kind of the warm-ups for the Civil War that became the battles in Kansas, when a bunch of people from the Sands passed through Springfield on their way to Kansas to fight against the slavery people. Now, the Springfield papers tended to be remarkably conservative and really generally awful, so put every trigger warning on this. But they wrote, "We are favored on Thursday at the sight of a class of men the agitation managers are sending to Kansas to battle for freedom. 75 drunken rowdies from the Sands of Chicago passed through our town, accompanied by a quota of, I'm not even going to pronounce that slur, on their way to Kansas. This gang of bawdy house bullies were uniformly like a crew of pirates, as the character is generally depicted on the boards of city theaters. As these fellows supposedly had engaged in a piratical campaign, they deemed it necessary to dress the character. A more ruffian-looking gang we have never seen before." Ruffians. This is around the time they started calling the people fighting for slavery border ruffians. So this is like, well, you're the real ruffians. Now, during this thing, Horace White, who would later be the editor of the Chicago Tribune, interred here in these hillside vaults in Graceland Cemetery, was sending guns to John Brown, the abolitionist who would go on to try to start a rebellion all by himself. This kind of continues in Chicago. This is a neighborhood around Division Street. Looked nothing like this in 1857. This is all pre-Chicago fire. But in 1857, we had our city elections that broke out into riots when the border ruffians tried to knock over polling places and cause as much chaos as possible at polling places in neighborhoods like up here around Division Street that were expected to be voting more of an anti-slavery ticket. A guy by the name of Charles Seifert was killed, and was spoken of as a martyr for Chicago and a martyr for freedom for at least a couple of years until the Civil War started and people kind of forgot his story. But for a couple of years, this was a major controversy. The more conservative papers like the Chicago Times were publishing articles like, well, Seifert was no angel, etc., and just making up biographies for him. Now, it's not a drawing of him. He was not a wealthy enough man that I would expect to find a picture of him from 1857. Closest we've got is just a drawing of his coffin in reports of his funeral. He would have been buried at the Old City Cemetery. Probably was never moved from the Old City Cemetery. I've never found anything about him ending up someplace else. We'll talk about some other people here. Up here at Graceland Cemetery is John and Mary Richardson Jones, the first black couple in Chicago to get rich. John had a house right where this parking lot is now in the South Loop area. It's like 9th and Dearborn. Not too far from where from where Joseph Henry Hudlin was living. And had a cleaning store and a tailor shop over here on Plymouth. That's the South Loop. But he came to Chicago. He and Mary were born free, came to Chicago, and learned to read from L.C.P. Freer. He helped getting in business and then was putting ads in Frederick Douglass's newspaper, effectively saying, hey, if you escape and make your way to Chicago, and I'll help you out. Now, there was a case even where he might have purchased a slave himself, really just for the purpose of freeing him. The same document that sold him also freed him. This was not something that abolitionists liked to do. They didn't like to act as though slavery was legitimate enough that they should get into a deal like this. But it did in a pinch. It might have been his sister-in-law, in fact. Well, this is John himself, and this is Mary, his wife, who would outlive him and gradually become a suffragist. Like a lot of women of her generation, she came to suffragism fairly slowly. But the story Mary had to tell over and over is the day that John Brown showed up at their house. And this would have been the previous house back over here. But he showed up when he was in the process of starting a slave revolt himself. He had a whole army that was going to overthrow slavery all by themselves and showed up. And Mary initially didn't want to let them in. She thought these looked like the toughest guys she had ever seen. But John said, well, just hide them out for a while. I'll go raise some money to help get them out of town. So she hid them out, then sent a guy off to State Street who was about John's size to get measured for a suit, and would later believe that that was the suit that John Brown would be hanged in. Now, the first person that John went to talk to get money was Allan Pinkerton, who had come to Chicago specifically to work on the Underground Railroad. They described him as the indefatigable Allan Pinkerton of Gurnee at the time. But he would also be working with a guy named Seth Payne. Seth Payne was a very eccentric guy. One newspaper called him a queer chicken. Some of my best friends are queer chickens. Others said that all the isms clung to him like burrs on a sheep wool, like spiritualism. He was into holding seances. Feminism, he was into that way early on. Vegetarianism, way before that caught on in the West. This is Seth Payne himself working with Allan Pinkerton at Antietam during the Civil War. And this is a new grave of his that was just put in place in the last couple of years by his biographer, Nancy Schumann, who just put out a whole book about him. I have to skip ahead a little bit here. There's a case right over here in the Loop near Clark Street. Right about where the Sears Tower now stands was the Armory, which is kind of a makeshift jail. 1860, a woman named Eliza Grayson escaped from slavery in Nebraska, where the status of slavery was kind of murky to begin with. But she ended up working in a house of ill fame here in Chicago, just as a domestic, according to most articles. But she was a little too free in talking about how she had escaped, and her enslaver, Stephen Knuckles, showed up to drag her away. But as he was so doing, a guy by the name of Chancellor Livingston Jenks just showed up and said, nope, you can't take her away. I'm arresting her for disorderly conduct. At this point, a mob was forming. Both Knuckles and Grayson were put in the Armory, where the Sears Tower is now, for disorderly conduct. But Eliza was very quickly hastened away and taken to Canada. But then Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and a lot of people started really cracking down just to show the South, no, we're serious. We're not going to try to take your slaves away. We're even going to help you catch them again. See, you don't have to secede from the Union and start a war. This brings us back to L.C.P. Freer. Now, in early 1861, the newly appointed U.S. Marshal, appointed by Lincoln himself, a guy named J.R. Jones, arrested a family that was on their way escaping. And later on, he would say his excuse was basically, it's my first day. Their enslaver had gone to Springfield to get a warrant for them. He knew that he couldn't get one in Chicago. Nobody would swear it out. But then they came to Marshal Jones and said, nope, it's your responsibility as Marshal. Otherwise, you will personally be responsible for the financial loss of these people who have run away. So L.C.P. Freer, once this arrest had been made, this had been the first time that had happened. People had actually been sent back out of Chicago, according to Freer, in about 8 years. So he put up an ad that said, the old Liberty Guard. The new United States Marshal is inaugurating a reign of terror among our colored population. Do you wish to take any step in the matter? If you do, or you are invited to a meeting this Friday at 7:30 number 51 Clark Street, none but live men are attended. Owen Lovejoy, who when accused of, was a congressman who when accused of stealing slaves said, yes, I do. Shout it from every rooftop, write it on every leaf that trembles in the forest. Said that if the marshal came out to Ottumwa where he lived, to Ottawa where he lived, they'd beat the crap out of him. So a mass exodus was arranged from Quinn Chapel as, by some accounts, hundreds of people fled from the place, fled on to Canada. Now, in any case, Jones went on and really just said it was my first day. I didn't know I could have gotten out of it, and was reported to be resigning at one point, but was still in office for quite a while. Ended up managing President Grant's finances after the war. Ended up becoming minister to Belgium for a while. Even most of the abolitionists in town decided that he had acquitted himself well enough. Should also cover really the ultimate Underground Railroad, the Union Army. Now there are a couple of people buried back here, back behind Eternal Silence, who are probably both pictured here. William Gill and Horace Jackson. Now, these were men from Kentucky who joined the Union Army, ended up serving alongside the USC, the 29th, the United States Colored Infantry 29th, which was mostly guys from Chicago. They probably would have been present at Appomattox when Robert E. Lee surrendered, then both ended up living in Chicago. Now, among their military files, there is one of their enslavers, Horace Jackson's enslaver, issued a claim for compensation. It still survives. It's really weird to see one of these things. But during the Civil War, there was also a case that is not really well recorded in Chicago history, but should be. I thought I had written a big article about this once, but I could only find a small one. But in 1862, a little bit before the Emancipation Proclamation was announced, but while the war was in full swing, there was an omnibus in Chicago, a bus, horse-drawn bus about like this, where the driver asked a black man to go sit outside or get off of the bus. It was kind of an informal rule that if women were uncomfortable, that they would have to go out and sit on the outside parts. In this case, the driver just said, "We don't serve your kind here," and kicked him off. This led to a riot. People were furious that this man had been kicked off of the bus. And this led to great excitement on Clark Street and outrage upon a colored man, the secessionist rampant. And newspapers kind of responded to this along party lines. The Chicago Times said, well, of course they kicked him off. And the Chicago Journal said, well, really, they just should have been clear on what the rules were. Whereas the Chicago Tribune was a lot nastier about this sort of thing. Chancellor Livingston Jenks eventually represented the guy when he sued the bus company, made a big speech about how what had happened here was a microcosm of what was happening in the nation overall. And Wilbur F. Story at the Chicago Times wrote a whole thing saying, does he ever think that he's the one being divisive? Odd. Also covered just briefly, I'm going a little over time here, but trying to enumerate all the people in Chicago who worked on the Underground Railroad and all of the cases is very difficult because so often we've just got a little bit. Eliza Porter is here at Rose Hill Cemetery. She was reputedly Chicago's first teacher. There was a point when she was living up in Wisconsin and was living by a lighthouse. There was an instance where she had to hide a few people who were trying to free from slavery in the lighthouse. In her daughter's biography of her, she said, "There's so many amusing incidents that happened related to this that I'm chuckling now just thinking about them." But she didn't say what any of those incidents were. She just got right back to talking about how pious her mother was. I also want to point out the closest analog I can think to Bovino and his gang of stormtroopers who have been out here tear gassing us and kidnapping people off of the streets these last couple of months. Judge Ellis's speech today, where she opened by reading the Carl Sandburg Chicago poem in full, then proceeded to absolutely take Bovino over her knee and spank him for lying under oath and everything, was a landmark moment, I think, in Chicago history. Judge Sarah Ellis, I don't know how much good it'll do, but this is a real hero right here. So this is what's going on in Chicago right now. It's not exactly the same issue, but it's about the closest analog I can find, and we are going to keep on fighting here in Chicago until these stormtroopers are gone. Chicago will still be here when these guys are gone. Well, all right, everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago. I'm going to go ahead and put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out like we always do. I got a lot of new stuff from the History Museum's microfilm room today. There's some great stuff in the finding there. Chris, thank you for that. I'll try to make it bigger font if I can. I got to get around to that Cemetery Coyote calendar for next year really soon. It's been a bad year for Cemetery Coyote pictures for me. I've got enough, But finding another 12 for a good calendar is another thing. Good night, Lori. Get some nice comments about this one on messages. Yeah, there were at least 3 or 4 people in the courtroom reporting all of Judge Ellish's statements. It was a party to read. Lynn, I have not seen Frankenstein yet. I think it starts streaming tomorrow, though. And no, it's not exactly the same issue, but it's still the same basic people coming to kidnap people off the streets and feeling that they have the full backing of the federal government for it. Like when Chancellor Jenks helped Eliza Grayson escape, President Buchanan supposedly rode to the city and said, remove Chancellor Jenks from office at once. He thought Chancellor was his title, it was his name. Thanks, Marita. Glad you made it too, Rose. The one thing about these guys is, these are probably the same guys who think that everybody ought to be carrying concealed weapons at all times and don't believe in any restrictions on firearms. But man, do they hate seeing people with whistles. Sandwiches, too, of course.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag.
Yep, that is Ember sitting on the ottoman. That's not all her, it's also my iPad. I was trying to read some of Douglas's speech from 1850. Man, I could not get through a lot of that. Oh, why, thanks, Todd. This weekend will be mostly cloudy, it says Bob. What I've got here is Saturday, 80% chance of rain all day, high of 49. Sunday, 85% chance of snow, high of 40. Yeah. School bullies grow up to be in law enforcement. Bullying is whack, get on the right track. That's what we should be chanting at them. Bullying is whack, get on the right track. Hey everybody, been watching? Anybody I didn't say hi to? Hey Jen, if you're still out there. It's going to be kind of hard for me being out of town next week, really, because I feel like I'm leaving behind my patrol group. So I've been doing morning and afternoon patrol shifts lately. It's not exciting. We stand there on corners in case something happens and try not to give the stink eye to every SUV that comes by. But we feel that it's a deterrent, too. Usually it's at school pickup and drop-off time. Today there were some landscapers out who asked for some extra guard. And the whistles, a group in the next neighborhood over from me scared people off the other day. sandwich. Yeah, I need a sandwich. I haven't had dinner yet. I better go get like a slice of pizza or something. I'm sipping on this scotch this whole time. There's going to be another episode of Tomb Snoopers out on Monday. Then we'll take a couple of weeks off because I'll be out of town. We didn't get quite far enough ahead. I didn't expect the series to go on this long. I thought it was going to be about 10 episodes, but now we're 11 episodes in, and only about half of the story that I thought we were going to be telling. Hey, there's Jenna. It was not a foot long. Park Avenue. Shucking along. Everybody's trucking. Trucking, yeah. All right. See if I got any hate mail over this. Doesn't look like any so far. Above the weather I got by the hour saying like 50% chance of rain in the afternoon. The snow might be a little too much. Good day for getting coyote pictures, baby. Coyotes love the snow. Running a tour, maybe not.
On the Alamo.
That may be why I've gotten so... How many got? Yeah, 5 and 4. It's not great. When am I heading over the pond? Next week. I head over on Monday if they don't cancel all the flights. We'll see. If nobody else has bought tickets by the morning, I'll see. But yeah, there's this bar right near me that does hot chocolate with marshmallows and alcohol. It warms you up and is delicious, and they like toast the marshmallows. Like, I'm a sucker for any place that actually like singes the marshmallows. There used to be this poutine place on Orleans Street that also did a chocolate peanut butter milkshake with toasted marshmallow on top. It was to die for. I have no idea how they ever went out of business. Creswell, of course. Yes, Chris, I'm hitting 5 shows next week. From Swansea to Glasgow. Yeah, I know if I cancel it, it won't snow. Good night, Kristen. Yes, grab something to eat, so should I. Though I did, like, for lunch, after the tour, I wanted to go to Transit Tees and get stuff for the bathroom, but it turned out they didn't open until 11. So I went over by Graceland, there's this, across the corner, I was gonna just go to the Subway, then realized there was a Mexican place next door. I got this burrito with chorizo that was all, like, toasted on top, and oh man, it was so good. Now I just want ice cream. Now I just want chocolate peanut butter ice cream. I got a lot of kinds of ice cream in my freezer, but that's not one of them.
Meeny, miny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny
Maybe I'll
Goodman and his
just
orchestra.
toss
And
one of
here's
those
Helen
Aldi
Born
red
sing,
bag
Eeny,
chicken
meeny,
breasts in
miny,
the
mo.
toaster oven. Old Marshall Field Frango mint liqueur bottle. Yum. Oh, Jenna's got that Reese's ice cream. It's so good. Mom, I can never find the Target chocolate peanut butter one here. You've tried to hit me to it many times, but I just can't find it here. But Target has some of the holiday flavors of Jenny's, including the pistachio macaron and the boozy eggnog. They did not have the cranberry panettone, or however you pronounce that second word, which is absolutely delicious. But they did have the pistachio macaron, delicious. Boozy eggnog. Tastes exactly like boozy eggnog, only it's frozen. Time of day. New Mavis Staples album out tomorrow. And I think a new Mountain Goats as well. Cherry pie was $2. Today in Bob Dylan world, the Jones Beach show came out on soundboard. There was some sneaky dealings of fans. There hasn't been a soundboard in years. There's a soundboard where you get to hear the part of Under the Red Sky where he said, both little boy and little girl were baked in a pie. Then adds, what kind of pie? Cherry pie. Dylan's called it Ray Paget. Says it's his favorite moment of the last several years. I was there. Jenna was there. All right, Lynn, enjoy the show.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Now I want pie, too. Pie, chocolate, peanut butter, ice cream, hot chocolate, toasted marshmallows. Like everything except actual food. Anything with nutritional value. Well, pie's got fruit in it, doesn't it? Black cherry shake from Whitey's Ice Cream in the Quad Cities. I'll go. I'll try it. I don't make it to the Quad Cities too much, except just passing through. I get some very nice messages over on Instagram about this episode. Noting, people outside of Chicago seem to believing the narrative that Chicago is some war-torn hellhole. And, well, it wasn't until these goons showed up. Yes, Warren sang about cherry pie. They were not really singing about pie. Well, those other hit songs, it was written in about 3 minutes because they needed a single. She's my cherry pie. Cool drink of water, such a sweet surprise. So good, like a poor man cry. Sweet cherry pie, yeah. Huh. Somebody says I should submit this episode to the Peabody Awards. Well, all right. Yeah, sure. If I was going to do this to submit to awards, I would have rehearsed a little bit more and not just been continually adding stuff to the right set till the last second. Ooh, Sarah's quoting Billy Boy, Billy Boy. A folk song in the tradition of Lord Randall and A Hard Rain's Are Gonna Fall. I could ramble about that for a long time, you know. The folk process and how folk songs interpolate from each other and evolve. Everybody's got a cherry pie but me around here.
Presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
All right, that's Benny wrapping up, so that's going to be me wrapping up. We'll see where we are on tickets tomorrow. And we'll figure the weekend out. So I got to figure the weekend out, and I got to get some food, and I got to put on some socks, too. I stepped in glue. These things happen. But thanks, everybody, for joining me. Thanks for this rather important issue. Keep on standing. Keep on fighting. There's another shot here, isn't there? I thought I had another one up here. Yeah, there we are. At the Morris train stop the other night. But all right, thanks everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'll see you tomorrow morning for another morning mini tour. Tomorrow is Find a Grave Friday. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying stay safe, stay strong, stay vigilant, and of course, stay spooky, everybody.